All right, sorry I didn't get to all your questions. I'm going to try to knock out every single one that we didn't get to in 5 minutes. We'll see if I can do it. All right, why is Abram in the Bible? Pretty sure this was just Jenny's example question, but I'll still answer it. And Abram was the father of Judaism, which is the first documented, organized religion of the one true God, which is kind of a big deal. So that's why he's in the Bible. What did the floodgates do in Genesis 1? I don't think there are floodgates in Genesis 1. There's floodgates in Genesis 7:11. So this verse says, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were opened." That's just a poetic way of saying that it rained a lot. All right, next. How much do you bench? I haven't benched in a long time. I mostly do bodyweight workouts. In what ways can the Holy Spirit manifest? Okay, so I mean, we know as Catholics that we can't do anything good without the help of God, without the help of the Holy Spirit. So anything good, like any virtue that you see in yourself, boom, that's the Holy Spirit manifesting. Some examples of this: you have the gifts of the Holy Spirit: wisdom, understanding, courage, reverence. Right, any of those qualities in a person, that is the Holy Spirit manifesting in them in an ordinary way. Same with the fruits of the Spirit, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, chastity, self-control, all that stuff. You may have been talking about more extraordinary manifestation of the Holy Spirit, the less common ones. This would be stuff like physical healings, right, or miraculously speaking other languages, so miracles. Those are less common. They do happen, but they're less common. And then you kind of have the in-between stuff. There have been a few times in my life when somebody comes up and says something to me, and they say something along the lines of, I really think the Holy Spirit wanted you to know this, XYZ. They tell me something. It's the exact thing that I need to hear. So that's not quite a full-blown miracle, but it's a little bit out of the ordinary too. Where is evidence for purgatory in the Bible? Bible never explicitly mentions purgatory. Purgatory is an entailment of some of the things in the Bible, some concepts in the Bible. Basically, purgatory is the idea that there's some kind of purification in between death and going to heaven for those who are going to heaven, for some people. So, but some scriptural evidence for this. I mean, two of the big ones. You got Revelation 21 mentions that nothing unclean will enter heaven. Right? Most people when they die are not perfectly pure and holy. Most people when they die still have some kind of attachment to sin, which means that somehow that needs to be purified before they get into heaven. The book of Second Maccabees 12 also talks about the concept of praying for the dead and how it's a good thing to pray for the dead. And I mean, somebody in heaven doesn't need your prayers, and somebody in hell, they can't benefit from your prayers. So there must be something else going on there. Why did God put Job through a bunch of tests? Short answer, we don't know. It doesn't say in the book explicitly God's motivations for doing that. You could maybe infer that it was to prove Satan wrong, because Satan's accusing Job of doing things for false motivations or whatever. I suppose you could look at the end result and see okay, at the end of the book of Job, God is glorified, Satan is proved to be a false accuser, and Job actually gets to know God face to face instead of just knowing of him, which is kind of the whole point in life. So maybe that's why God did it. Does God say anything about what came before the book of Genesis, and also does God say anything about how we can't comprehend how God came about? Okay, kind of two questions there. So first, anything about what came before the book of Genesis? Nothing came before the events of the book of Genesis, right? The events of the book of Genesis include the beginning of time itself. So by definition, nothing was before that. We can't comprehend how God came about. Okay, good question. God did not come about. God always was. The name that God gives when Moses asks his name is I am who am. All right, God is the one who is eternally. Right, the whole idea of God, what God is. We talk about who God is more than what God is. The whole idea of what God is. Right, if we look around in the world, we see that nothing that we see can explain its own existence, which means there must be something that actually gives existence to everything, and that's what we call God. Explain the whole thing with the she-bears and Elisha. Okay, yep, this is in 2 Kings 2. Right, there's these kids making fun of Elisha, and he curses them, and these she-bears come out and tear them to pieces. I think it's a cautionary tale about why you shouldn't disrespect your elders, or else bears will eat you. There's other interpretations. Father Mike Schmitz has a different interpretation. You can find that in day 171 of his Bible in Ear podcast. It's about 20 minutes into the episode. Why are there so many rules throughout the Bible, especially in Sirach? I don't think Sirach has a lot of rules. Sirach is a book of advice. I would call Sirach advice more than rules. There are a lot of rules in the Bible, though. There's a lot of rules in the Old Testament. Exodus, Deuteronomy have tons of rules, the old Mosaic Law. Why are those in the Bible? Well, basically because people needed them, because people are historically stupid and we screw stuff up. right? Throughout the Old Testament, it's just story after story after story of people screwing up when God gives them everything. Jesus actually did break down all of the rules in a really concise way. And he said, right, love God and love your neighbor. All of the law and the prophets hinges on those two commandments. But now the thing is, because we're stupid and we screw everything up, those two aren't good enough for us. And so we need everything explained out to us like we're five, and so that's where all these rules come from, right? It's explaining how to actually live life well. Because we need a detailed explanation because we're stupid and we can't take love God and love neighbor seriously enough to actually just do those things. Okay, how did we get the book of Hebrews? Okay, so interesting question. I mean, Book of Hebrews is I think the only book in the New Testament that is completely anonymous. Nobody claims to be the author. The author isn't mentioned. So I guess the only answer I can give to that is somebody wrote it. Somebody wrote the big Book of Hebrews, and it was preserved by the Christian community because it's really good and says really good stuff about Jesus. What is your response to people saying the church used to be good but went off the rails when Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire? My response would be that's really reductionistic and myopic. I think it's very reductionistic to say that like everything went all bad after Constantine. Because for one thing, like if Christianity is true, then it should be legal. So just the whole being legal thing is a good thing. Well, I mean, what really changed was that like one set of challenges was traded for another set of challenges, right? There's a different kind of challenges when you're suddenly mainstream versus when you've been a rebel the whole time, you know? There's a lot of cons to that. I mean, it's much easier to get complacent and lukewarm and open the door to a ton of corruption. But there's pros too, like nobody's trying to kill you anymore. So, I mean, that's definitely a good thing. So it wasn't all bad. Is God's gender ever specifically said? No, it is not said because God has no gender. Right? So gender is something that God created to foreshadow the union between Jesus and the church. Gender is something God created as an image, as a symbol of the union between Jesus and the church. Right? So, no, God doesn't have a gender. God's gender is never mentioned. God revealed himself to us analogically as our Father, which is why we use male pronouns for him. And when I say analogically, I got to keep in mind, like, we are the analogy, not God, right? Our fatherhood, human fatherhood, comes from him and his nature. Why does it say in Exodus 33:20 that no one can see God and live, but in John 14:9 Jesus says, whoever has seen me has seen the Father? Great question. Different senses of the word see. And you'll notice that neither of those senses are literal. Like, it's impossible to literally see God with your physical eyeballs, because the only things we can see with our physical eyeballs are of the material world, which God is not. So Exodus 33:20 refers to the fact that if God were to reveal the fullness of who he is to a human being, we wouldn't be able to handle it. We would die because it's just too much. What Jesus is talking about is how everything that he does reveals the Father to us. And last one, were Jesus' parables actually real stories, or were they just made up? Okay, short answer, we don't know. Jesus doesn't say explicitly, but a slightly longer answer, I think it was probably a mix. Like in my homilies, I use a mix between real stories and just hypothetical scenarios, and I would imagine Jesus probably did the same. Just as a note, there's only one parable in which Jesus actually gives somebody a name. That's the story of the rich man and Lazarus, which suggests to me that that one might be less hypothetical and a little bit more rooted in reality. Okay, all right. 8.5 minutes, so not quite 5 minutes, but I think you did okay. Thanks, guys.